Anybody out there watching the World Cup? I'm looking up at the top balcony. Anybody watching the World Cup up there? Roy is. I know Roy is. Roy and his whole family. I heard you guys. Are you watching, Yannick? Yeah. Okay. Jody, is it Jody watching or Max is watching? Okay. Okay. There are people watching the World Cup. Julie says absolutely not. Not sure why, but we can talk about that later. One of the greatest thrills of the World Cup is watching low-ranked teams compete against the higher-ranked teams, because every once in a while, David defeats Goliath. A couple of years ago in Qatar, 2022, you might remember that Argentina, ranked number 3, was mismatched for their first game against Saudi Arabia, that was ranked at the time number 51. Number 3 versus number 51. And of course, Argentina is led by legendary Messi, the legendary Messi. This perhaps is his last World Cup experience. Argentina had been on a 36-game winning streak. And in the first half, Messi scored, indeed, 1-0. And then in the second half, Saudi Arabia powered ahead and within the span of 5 minutes scored 2 goals and eventually defeated Argentina 2-1. And that is the true underdog story. Our text this morning in this series on the life of David, in which we are looking at the relationships of David and other people within the stories of 1st and 2nd Samuel. Our text for this morning is a story, one of my favorite stories, the story of David and Goliath. Perhaps you know that story well. David, a simple shepherd boy. At this time, he's not king, though in the previous chapter, we were together 2 weeks ago. I'm grateful for Bader preaching last week as I had teaching responsibilities in the city. 2 weeks ago, we talked about when Samuel anointed David, but David perhaps didn't even know why Samuel was anointing him. But even still, David is a shepherd boy, and Goliath is this imposing Philistine giant. And within the story, there are all these other characters who represent various ways that people respond to difficult or impossible, in air quotes, impossible situations. Ultimately, the story points not to David, this tiny little victor. No, the story points to David's God, who gives victory against overwhelming odds. The hero in the text, as we've been saying throughout, is never a human being. The hero of the biblical text is always God, because we will always find fault with a human being. But with God, there's no fault, and he is always the hero. So the hero is not David, who overcomes the impossible odds. The hero is God, who specializes in impossible odds. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking too little of God when we're facing an impossible situation. Are you facing an impossible situation? Are you facing a difficulty today? It could be a difficulty at home, at work, in your neighborhood. It could be a difficulty with your future, your past. It could be an impossible situation, something that you feel like is impossible to resolve or reconcile. And overwhelming situations can make us feel like we are only a victim, like our only option is simply to relinquish to the power of the thing in front of us, relinquish to the problem or to the quote-unquote giant in front of us. The odds are stacked against us, we think. Have you ever felt that way? I've felt that way. I've felt that way many times in my life. Small things and in big things. But the story of David and Goliath is, again, a whole lot bigger than the story of an underdog encountering and conquering impossible situations. It is the story of a man who confronts that impossible situation with a bold faith in a God who specializes in the impossible. Bold faith in a God who specializes in the impossible. That's our story this morning. As we retell the story of David's victory over Goliath, we're going to walk through 4 movements in the text, 4 movements. And as we go through, we're going to look at the responses of 4 different characters or groups of characters as they respond to the overwhelming situation of the Goliath in front of them. And then before we're done, we're going to talk about our God, because again, it's about an amazing king, but it's about an even better God. So, scene one, the first group of people that respond, all Israel. The response of all Israel. Let's set the scene a little bit here. The impossible situation begins, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 17, 1 Samuel 17. You can find it in your bulletin, or you can find it on the screen, or you can use your own Bible. The impossible situation begins in the very first sentence of 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. You might remember that the Philistines are the relentless enemy of the people of Israel throughout the Old Testament. Only a few chapters earlier, they had restricted the distribution of iron among the people of Israel, thereby restricting the Israelites from reproducing iron weapons. This is like the Iron Age. We talked about that in history classes, I'm sure. This is a remnant of that period of time. The Philistines had a bit of control over the reproduction of iron instruments in this particular region at this particular time. They had prevented the Israelites from obtaining advanced weapons. I mean, in our day, we're talking about like drone strikes in the Strait of Hormuz. Back then, they were talking about like an axe head. Like that was the seriously dangerous weapon, was an axe head made out of iron. And the Israelites didn't have access to these things. And then the Philistines, knowing that they had the Israelites in a precarious position, they gather for battle to attack Israelite territory. In verse 2, Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. Can you picture this? The valley of Elah. On the one side are the armies of the Philistines. On the other side are the armies of the Israelites. This is a difficult situation. War is a difficult situation, but it's not yet impossible. It's going to get impossible. Verse 4, there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath. Now, this guy Goliath has been, mythologized over the 3,000 years since, but let's say something about Goliath. He's called a champion in verse 4. The word for champion literally means a man from the space between. This is a very particular word. It's a phrase that's used to refer to a warrior who would fight in representative combat an opponent from the other opposing army. It's a representative warrior who would step into the space in between, and he would fight another warrior from the other side. They'd fight in the space in between. And the rules were simple. The rules were the two champions fighting to the death, and then the nation of the dead soldier becomes the subject to the nation of the victorious soldier. It's simple as that. Now, whether people followed that or not, it was at least a way to stave off the time between a stalemate. And again, the odds are pretty significant. This is difficult, but not yet impossible, until we catch a glimpse of the details around this Philistine champion who's stepping into the middle. His height was 6 cubits and a span. How's that for impressive? How many cubits are you? Have no idea, right? Let's translate that. That's 9 feet, 9 inches. Anybody here reach that? I mean, he's ducking to get under that wall. I mean, he is a tall giant. 9 feet, 9 inches tall. While Israel's army only wore basic garments and had little access to weaponry because of what the Philistines had done to restrict access to iron weapons, Goliath wore heavy armor. 126 pounds of armor. I'm not going to ask anybody how much you weigh, but there are people in this room that weigh 126 pounds. Can you imagine carrying somebody? Oh my goodness, that's wild. I have a child that weighs probably about 126 pounds. And this man's power wasn't just in his physical size. He also knew how to play psychological head games. He would call out to the people of Israel in verse 8. In verse 8, he would cry out, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Can you imagine? 9'9". Give me a man that we may fight together, he would cry out. Now, this is what you might call an impossible situation. So how did Israel respond? The people of Israel, verse 11, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. They were terrorized and demoralized. And in verse 16, for 40 days, can you imagine? For 40 days, day after day, for 40 days, this giant Philistine came forward, took his stand morning and evening. I defy the people of Israel. Now, most people, I believe, respond to impossible situations a lot like the Israelites, with fear. A lot of people respond to overwhelming situations with fear. And fear can cripple us into passivity and resignation for lengthy periods of our lives. Think about, the Israelites in the face of the Philistines for 40 days. This is a lengthy period of time in a battle that could have been won in a day. It's easier, we think, to just let barking dogs lie. Don't stir the pot, especially when you see no alternatives on the horizon. Fear can cripple us into seasons of inactivity. And so day after day, the giant takes his stand, and we shrink back from the challenge simply because it feels insurmountable and we cannot see a way forward. So many people live their lives like that. But that's no way to live. Scene 2 in our text is the response of Eliab. Eliab, we saw this one earlier in chapter 16. He was the good-looking guy. He was the one that David immediately thought was going to be king. But this is from verses 12 through 30. Now, into the stalemate of 40 days steps David. Now, David, at this point, was probably not old enough to fight in the army. According to the law, the minimum age for military service was 20, so David served a support role. According to verse 15, his support role in verse 15, David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So Saul is with the armies at the valley of Elah, and not too far away, according to the map, is Bethlehem, where Saul's father, or David's father, Jesse, lives. So he's going back and forth, probably because he's too young. With his 3 older brothers in the army, David's presence at home certainly would have helped his father. And so his father, Jesse, would say to his son David, verse 17, take for your brothers an ephah of parched grain. Parched doesn't sound very good, but I'm sure that was good grain. Take for your brothers something like some staples, because families at the time were responsible. Can you imagine? Families were responsible to send rations to the front line to support their relatives. And so Jesse would send David as a messenger back and forth between home and the battlefront, saying to David, verse 18, see if your brothers are well and bring some token from them. Now, what's that token? The token is probably compensation. Because the brothers, the boys, the older sons were probably being compensated for their work, Jesse was losing valuable workers in his farm, and so David was bringing some compensation, some coins or whatever, back to his father in exchange for dropping off some parched grain, back and forth, back and forth. And as he would visit his brothers, he asked his brothers in verse 26, what shall be done? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back earlier. So David arrives at the camp. He arrives at the camp. He sees his brothers. He leaves the food in the camp. He greets his brothers on the battlefront. And as he's exchanging news with his brothers, out comes Goliath. We presume out comes Goliath. And the text says that he's saying the same thing over and over again every day. What is he saying? He's saying that same thing that we've heard before. I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And David hears this. And so he questions the soldiers. He's not questioning his brothers at this point, but the other soldiers. What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Verse 26. And they explain that Saul had made two promises. He'd promised two things for the champion, the one who'd step into the space in between and fight Goliath. Saul promised two things. Number one, Saul promised that he'd give his daughter in marriage. I mean, that's a pretty big promise. Like, what did the daughter think? That's a great question. But regardless, he promised his daughter. Number two, he promised that his family would be exempt from all national obligations. Can you imagine the whole family exempt from the IRS for the rest of their lives? Like, how cool is that? And probably, hopefully, the state of Illinois too. So anyways, so David's brother, Eliab, hears David talking with the other men about these arrangements, about the things that would be done for the one that would attempt to kill this Philistine, and Eliab grows angry at David. Verse 28. Imagine these words spoken in anger. Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. You're just a pretender, and it's all just pretense. You're a fake. You're a phony. And ultimately, you've abandoned your duties to your family to come here, and you're just a distraction, David. Go home, he's saying. Anger and control. And in his anger and control, he cannot see that God might have a plan in and through his younger brother. Again, many people respond to impossible situations just like Eliab. They lash out in anger with a desire to control. Many people try to fix things, scared of what might happen if things don't go as they think they should go. But here's the reality for any of us who have ever tried to control situations involving other people. The reality is that control is always just an illusion. The more you attempt to grasp something, the more frustrating it becomes as it slips through your fingers. A preoccupation with control inhibits us from getting down to the real business of living, and it suppresses the real joy that comes in the relinquishment of control, even in the direst of situations. Living with that need to control is a way to respond to impossible situations, but it is not a good way to live. Scene 3, the response of Saul. Eventually, the boldness of young David, this young man going back and forth, was recounted to King Saul, who had David brought to him. And in verse 30, David said to King Saul, "Let no man's heart fail him because of Goliath. Your servant," meaning himself, "your servant will go and fight this Philistine." The best critics are the ones who bring solutions, right? Why are all the people complaining? David says, "I'll be your guy. I'll go forward." I mean, I kind of imagine David saying this with a squeaky high voice, like, "I'll go forward." He's barely able, as we'll find out in a moment, he's barely able to put on even the armor. David's solution seems untenable to Saul. How can David fight Goliath? David is young. David has absolutely no experience. Battles, this is Saul's mindset. He's king, and he's fought other enemies. He knows something about impossible situations, or at least almost impossible situations. He knows that battles are won by seasoned soldiers with significant experience. Here's the thing I want us to catch. He has certain assumptions about how things should go because of how he's seen things go in the past. Battles are won by seasoned soldiers. That's how it's gone in the past. That's how it's going to go in the future. And so David responds to King Saul and he says, "I'm a shepherd. Like, I've got experience. Check out my resume. Like, my resume says, shepherd. I've grabbed the beards of lions and bears and I've killed them." I mean, how much more could an uncircumcised Philistine be, right? Verse 37. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Now, at this point, I'd like to give Saul the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, look at that, there's the faith of Saul. But I don't think that's what that was. I think he was probably really annoyed with this little guy. And, even if David was cremated on the battlefront, Saul had no intent to relinquish control of Israel to the Philistines. He wasn't going to hold up his end of the bargain. I read this as Saul giving in to the youthful idealism of what he sees as an impetuous young man. I see Saul's response as simple resignation. Nonetheless, Saul knows how battles are won. And so to this young man, he gives his armor. He gives a helmet of bronze, a coat of mail. I kind of think Lord of the Rings there, but it's probably not. Especially not the impenetrable, whatever that was called. A sword strapped over armor, and again, in Saul's experience, this is how battles are fought, with armor and swords. But David could not manage in Saul's armor. Presumably, he was too small for it. And in verse 39, David put them off. David was not Saul. Saul was a king in the likeness of kings. He dressed himself in armor because that's how battles are won. Again, an impossible situation, a giant man and a puny little boy. A giant and a little shepherd. Like the Israelites, like Eliab, Saul is afraid. This is an impossible situation. How will he respond to this impossible situation? What he does is he perpetuates the status quo. He perpetuates the way things have always been done. He puts old armor on a new body. Many people respond to its impossible situations just like Saul. They perpetuate the same solutions over and over, never seeing that the presence of God, this is one of my favorite quotes of C.S. Lewis, the presence of God shatters preconceptions. And the shattering of our preconceptions is the evidence that God is there with us. Richard Rohr, who's been one of my favorite writers in recent years, he writes, the human ego prefers anything, just about anything. The human ego prefers anything to falling or changing or dying. The ego is that part of you that loves the status quo, even when the status quo is not working. It attaches itself to past and present and fears the future. And again, that's no way to live, to just repeat the same old behaviors of the past. Then into the mix, the next scene, scene 4, is the response of David, the final scene in our text, beginning in verse 41. And here we're going to read bigger blocks of the text, beginning in verse 41. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David, with his shield bearer in front of him. That seems unfair, that this giant needed a shield bearer, 9 foot, 9 inches, and he's still got to have somebody carrying his shield for him. Regardless, verse 42, when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy. There's that word again, Carol, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, this giant man says to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. There was no glory for Goliath in defeating an underage shepherd armed with sticks and stones. The odds were surely in his favor. This would be the giant going up against the little boy. And David knew something that Goliath didn't know. Verse 45, David says, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Just as his weapons were different than Saul's, so his warfare were different than Goliath's. Goliath is outnumbered. Why is Goliath outnumbered? Goliath is outnumbered because it's the Lord of hosts who is with David. And Yahweh, the Lord of hosts, is the true champion who steps into the middle in the valley of Elah. The battle belongs not to David, not to Goliath, but to the Lord. He is Yahweh, and this is the literal translation of Lord of hosts, Yahweh Sabaoth. He is the Lord of hosts. He is the God of armies. This name, Yahweh Sabaoth, emphasizes two things. First, he is the mightiest warrior, the all-powerful champion. He is the mightiest warrior, the all-powerful champion. And second, his power surpasses every other power, whether heavenly or earthly or cosmic. His power surpasses every other power. And David knows that. This little boy knows that. Yahweh Sabaoth is not just one warrior God amongst many gods. No, he is the singularly powerful God. He is the champion of his people who steps into the space between and whose power is sufficient to overcome every impossible situation. In verse 46, this day, the Lord will deliver you into my hand, David says. What presumption, right? This day, the Lord, I'm imagining, this day, the Lord will deliver you. How awkward that must have been. And I will strike you down and cut off your head. You. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Love this story. Two champions met in the valley of Elah that day. Human eyes saw impossible odds, but the champion of Israel was not David. The champion of your life is not you. The champion is Yahweh Sabaoth, the God of armies, and the battle belongs to the Lord, and our God never fails. David knows his God, and David has seen how his God has worked. And so David responds to this impossible situation by demonstrating bold faith in a God who specializes in impossible situations. Here it comes. David reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out a stone the size of a tennis ball. And he hurls it at Goliath with such force that it's going to get a little PG here, that it crushes the frontal bone of his cranium and it sinks into his forehead. That's gross. But hey, Netflix makes a whole lot worse than that. With a sling and a stone, he is victorious over Goliath. And then David grabs, PG-13 now, David grabs Goliath's sword and he cuts the head off of the giant, off of his lifeless body. A nasty, brutal, but customary act that proves undeniably that the impossible situation is resolved. All of us are going to face impossible situations. If you're not in one now, you're going to face one. And you've probably gone through one in the past. Whether it's challenges with work, whether it's joblessness, whether it's a personal struggle, we probably could pretty quickly come up. We might think, okay, I don't want to give that one because that would expose way too much. But I'll give you, it might take us more time to come up with the penultimate impossible situation in our lives. But all of us have something deep down that drives us to our knees. And like the characters, plural, in this story of David and Goliath, even people of faith are tempted to respond to impossible situations in unhelpful ways. Just by way of review, some people respond, they react with fearful resignation and they let fear cripple them into a season of inactivity, just paralyzed for lengthy periods of time. That's no way to live. Some people react by grasping for control. It's either fight or flight. These people are fight. They're afraid of what might happen if they lose control. And most of us will face those impossible situations reacting with the same old ineffective solutions that have never worked. It is instinctual to respond to impossible situations with habits and patterns that we've learned over a lifetime. We operate according to what we've learned, but again, it's no way to live. So what would it be like for you, for me, in that time of challenge to truly believe that Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of armies, the God of armies, the God who never fails, is with you? What would it be like to respond to that impossible situation, truly believing that the God of armies is with you? The better response is always bold faith in the God who specializes in the impossible. About 500 years ago, Martin Luther was up against some impossible odds. Not only had he been labeled a heretic by the Catholic Church, and there was literally a hunt for his life, he was under intense pressure within the Protestant church, which largely was established by him, but there was intense pressure within because of theological disputes and competing agendas about how aggressive they should be and taking over the world with this new Protestant faith. And on top of that, the bubonic plague was permeating Wittenberg, 1527. It's almost exactly 500 years ago. Ultimately, this bubonic plague would claim the life of his second child, Elizabeth. And against the backdrop of plague, pressures from outside, the Pope who wants to kill him, inside, this divisiveness among his own people, against the backdrop of overwhelming circumstances, Luther writes perhaps his most famous song. He didn't write a lot of hymns, but this one you're going to know, and I'm not going to sing it, and we're not going to sing it, but I'm just going to read it. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark. Think about like a beam, a bulwark, never failing. Our helper, he amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe doth seek to work us woe. His craft, speaking of the ancient foe, his craft and power are great and armed with cruel hate. On earth is not his equal. In other words, we live in a world of very, very challenging things. And we do have a spiritual enemy. Did we in our own strength confide? Our striving would be losing. If we tried to do this on our own, we couldn't do it. We're not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. God has chosen a warrior for us. Dost ask who that may be? Christ Jesus. It is he. Lord Sabaoth, his name, the God of armies, from age to age the same. And he must win the battle. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity that you give to us day after day and year after year to continue to trust you. We never outgrow our need to rely upon you. Bless us, Lord, as we as a community of people come together to encourage each other in faith and trust. And bless us, Lord, as individuals. Draw us closer. Even when our hearts would wander, draw us closer even still. We thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.